There is over 50% of the internet's world's users that trust one closed source and centralized app suite for their daily knowledge creation and collaboration. It's called Google Workspace. We think that it is absolutely catastrophic that over half of the internet's users are dependent on one single company. Our approach is to really show that we've reached a critical point where the crypto tech stack is mature enough to provide people with apps that look like their everyday apps. It's privacy preserving, self-sovereign, on-chain, and you can collaborate with people in a peer-to-peer manner, real time. Imagine how important access permissions will be in a world where everything can interoperate, and transparency for the powerful, privacy for the weak.
Everybody, welcome back to another episode of Roll Call. I am one of your hosts, Diana Chen, and I'm joined today by my wonderful co-hosts, Spencer Graham and Nick Naraghi, co-founders of HAT Protocol. And we have a special guest today, Andreas, founder of Fileverse, joining us to talk about all things Fileverse, how they manage permissions on chain and manage on-chain communities. So welcome, Andreas. I'm so happy to have you here today.
Hello, Diana. Thank you so much for having me.
And welcome to my co-host as well. It's great to see you, as always.
As always. Thank you.
So I want to start off and just give people, set the tone a little bit, give people a bit of context about Fileverse. I think everyone has at least heard of Fileverse if they're not super familiar with it yet. So to start, can you just give us kind of like a high-level overview of Fileverse? What is a problem or problems that Fileverse is trying to solve for the community?
Okay, great. So I'll just throw out there, maybe some people know us as ddocs nowadays. It's interesting, like our name suddenly changed because we released a pretty successful app. So now we're called ddocs to a lot of new people. So what is Fileverse? Let me start with a problem that we see and that we're trying to address. There is over 50% of the internet's world's users that trust one closed source and centralized app suite for their daily knowledge creation and collaboration. It's called Google Workspace. And we think that it is absolutely catastrophic that over half of the internet's users are dependent on one single company, remaining trustworthy, remaining focused on satisfying their users rather than other key actors in their organization, that disgruntled employee will not come and delete all my data, that they will not continue to have as many leaks and breaches and backdoor deals with state actors that want to have a backdoor in their systems, etc., etc. So it's almost a prayer at this point for a lot of people in crypto, the why centralized bad, why decentralized good. But our approach is to really show that we've reached a critical point where the crypto tech stack is mature enough to be combined in a very smart way with another stack that has had 50 years of growth called peer-to-peer technologies more generally, in order to provide people with apps that look like their everyday apps, like Google Workspace, that has similar UX, does not make it too complicated for people to create an account, start getting usage, etc., and that are simply useful. So this is what we're focusing on. Right now, we've released just ddocs.new, which is an alternative to Google Docs. It's privacy preserving. It's self-sovereign. It is on-chain, and you can collaborate with people in a peer-to-peer manner, real time, which is really cool, in my opinion, and avoids a lot of the problems that I started my long tirade with, including like a privacy, loss of data, inability to access your own account and personal information, etc. Voila.
Love it. Yeah, I think that's a very real problem that anyone who's worked in the traditional corporate space or even in crypto companies has probably experienced or at least thought of at some point, is like some employee gets fired from the company. They're upset about it. They try and hack it back into your system, do all of these things that you don't want. So very important problem that it solves, very relatable. One thing that pops into mind when, you're talking about like privacy and things like this is because, I'm thinking like in the DAO space, we're all about like transparency as well. And especially when working with people from all over, like you want to have a certain level of transparency so that everybody has the same context in order to work at the same level together. So I'm curious how you think about squaring privacy with transparency, because they seem, on the surface, like maybe two clashing ideas. So how do you guys think about, or how do you think about that, or how does Fileverse think about that, like balancing that trade-off?
Yeah, it's a great question. There are different angles to the question, so I'll take one approach to the answer. Let me know if you want to expand it. But I'll start with the old adage of the cypherpunks, which is transparency for the powerful, privacy for the weak. And it's important to put it like that, at least in my angle, because a lot of the decisions that have been baked in the traditional centralized systems that we use every day assume privacy over how interactions happen between users, let's say, or a person and a server. It hides most things about the encryption schemes that are used. It hides things that are personal and reusable outside even. For example, a social graph that the person might have built up as they've used the app and connected with people. So those things, ironically, are quite obfuscated in traditional systems. You get only through their UI a bit of access on your own personal data. And our approach has been to actually go for making most of that information available on chain if it has a purpose. So for example, if a third-party app, another UI protocol like Farcaster wants to interact with the Fileverse smart contracts, they should be able to do it productively, meaning sometimes even in a way that is not ideal for Fileverse as an organization, but ideal for the user as an individual, because that third-party app that might be competing with us, who knows, will be able to port that social graph or facilitate that porting for the end user. So we've taken an approach that is, I'll be fully honest, it's quite experimental. There is no clear list on what should be transparent, what should be kept private. So we're playing around with things. Your identity, public. Your social graph, public. Your addressing of files, public, sometimes private actually. Access to your files, private completely, with some access permissions that go around there. When you last logged in or checked a file, private completely. Extra metadata that could be turned into a hunt for who is the owner of those docs, like IP, hidden completely. So yeah, this is how we're going about it, but it's evolving with feedback.
What are some of those aspects that more so live in the gray area? Because some things, it seems in your mind, it's very clear, this is always private, this is always public. What have you encountered where you're like, it's really unclear?
Yeah, again, great question. So one is simply public files of an organization. So most organizations that are using things like ddocs want to actually be able to share access only with people within the organization, but some want to open up the access to something that is more general, meaning, okay, if Bob managed to do a lot of contributions to my organization's documentation or code or whatever, Bob should be able to be considered in our information environment, in our drive, if you want, as a non-stranger. And it would be ideal if my drive, if my archive as an organization can recognize if someone is, not a stranger, not a complete stranger, and deserves actually access to a certain level of files. So for that, you actually need some content addressing on-chain to be public and not completely private, because you need to associate some permissions to those content hashes. So you want to keep that public. I'll finish with one thing. There is some really interesting work happening by the Aztec team on shared secret state and Noir more generally. And we're looking into that to see if we can have the best of both worlds. Yeah.
Maybe it's obvious, but why use blockchains for accomplishing the permission management for Fileverse?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I'm going to cheat just because I've been answering that question for a long time. And one day I logged on to Twitter, and somebody had asked us this on the main Fileverse account. And the person that ended up answering is actually Vitalik, on why it's important to have that information on chain and what are the benefits of doing so. TLDR, it's for self-sovereignty, for the ability to not be dependent on Fileverse remaining honest with the people that use Fileverse smart contracts. It's for you to have the right to exit. It's for you to have the right to customize your experience even further, because you can access and you have full control over your information. So I'll just put the tweet in the chat if anybody wants to relish.
And I'll
add
another one, which I think we care about a lot and we think is very important, which actually maybe I'll start by restating the cypherpunk quote that you gave a little bit ago. And they basically saying the same thing, but with slightly different words, which is that privacy for your own private stuff and transparency, or at the very least verifiability for the stuff that you share with others for shared resources. And I think that's important because, and where blockchains can really be valuable, is that nobody does things only on their own, or very rarely is somebody only doing things on their own. If somebody's just doing things on their own, they can just have everything fully private, great. But anytime they want to share anything with anybody, do it, work with them, collaborate with them, coordinate with them about anything, those other people need to see at least something. And then the question becomes, how do we define who those other people are? How do we control or figure out when those other people should get access and to what? And what I think blockchains can give us a really strong capability for is programmatically determining that, writing code, embedding the logic for what that should be, and in a very customizable, flexible, and then autonomous way, and then just having that run without having to trust Google to manage that for you. And that, I think, is extremely powerful, because we can do things like make sure that everybody that is in a given organization has access to the critical information and nobody else has access to that critical information, and do so in a way that when people join the organization, they automatically get that, and when they leave, they automatically have it revoked. And that kind of dynamic sort of stuff is, I think, really only possible with dynamic stuff combined with the trustworthiness of the way that works is only possible with blockchains.
Yeah, I really liked. I'll pick his answer over mine. Actually, it's much more detailed. And actually, Spencer, you reminded me something I heard just before DEF CON by Josh Stark from the Ethereum Foundation, talking about the hardness of Ethereum, which is another way of talking about, okay, why would you put some things on chain? And I think it's what attracted me first to Ethereum back in the days, is that idea that, okay, I'm going to just try not to butcher what he said, but you give Ethereum code and you receive a very strong guarantee that it will be able to run anytime if you call on it. And you give Ethereum data, and you'll know with quite a bit of certainty that it will be available in the future. It will be, this is very important, unaltered and uncorrupted, which are properties that you had to some degree in peer-to-peer networks, but that advances much more with strict global consensus added to the mix.
So is there a difference between unaltered and uncorrupted?
Good question. So the unaltered and uncorrupted is what Josh Stark users, like he juxtaposes both. Now, what difference does he mean by that? I would say unaltered, you'll be, so that it's append only. So there is a block that will have, let's say that from the moment that the block is out there, you can't alter the information anymore. So you know that there was this snapshot information at some point. And uncorrupted, maybe he means more like that maybe the wrong identity did not, in the end, alter the next block iteration of that same piece of data by getting somehow access because it would be seen, and so it wouldn't be accepted because they don't have access. Maybe something like that.
So maybe in terms of, I think this is sort of an interesting thing to pick apart, in terms of Fileverse, in terms of a document, that document might be changing over time. And so unaltered means you always know that you can find a previous copy and that will never have changed once it was sort of checkpointed or stored or saved or cached somewhere.
Yeah.
But then also you have confidence that the changes that are being made are not being made by somebody that they shouldn't be made by, or that they're correct according to the rules of the system that you understand them to be, or something like that.
Yeah. What's it called again? In cybersecurity, it's CIA, it's confidentiality, integrity, and availability. And here it's integrity that we keep touching.
Yes. So I want to weave a couple threads here. One thing, which I would love, Josh Stark's piece, Adams Institution's blockchains, is sort of guarantees of the state or the future of the things that we put on chain. I think we disintermediated financial transactions with this Bitcoin. And now we're disintermediating compute with Ethereum. And there's an aspect of shared resources, which Spencer brought up earlier. It's like, if you want people to actually collaborate and work together, you need Ethereum and the shared compute guarantees in order to really do that in a disintermediated way that doesn't rely on centralized actors. And then Andreas, what you brought up at the beginning of explanation of Fileverse is the co-creation of knowledge. So I wonder if we look at a group's knowledge or the co-created knowledge as a resource from the shared resources frame, if that gives us something here to understand from first principles what exactly this evolution is happening. Take the maturity of the stack that allows us to build applications on top of the crypto rails and say, okay, now a group of people of any scale can actually do knowledge production as a shared resource. Particularly interesting to me in the era of more and more AI agents coming on chain and participating in these types of environments. How do you think about that?
Yeah, there were a lot of interesting things in what you said, but the core premise of thinking about the shared resources. Sorry, I think I keep quoting people, but you reminded me of someone else actually. You can see the terminally online crypto boy, who's Ethan Buchman from Cosmos, one of the developers on Cosmos, who said that the same way that iPhones had kickstarted the personal computing revolution, blockchains will kickstart the group computing revolution.
Yes.
And so, it's a bit of an extension of what you say, but I think it's essentially the same thing, unless I misunderstood. And to me, it's fascinating because you have an infinite design space that immediately opens up to anyone that actually takes a minute to consider what you can do with a shared memory among global participants, and no limitation for how many participants they can be. It's pretty amazing because you can take, instead of being completely revolutionary and starting an app that looks at, okay, what can we do that we could never do before, even if you do the exercise of taking activities people do every day and try to think of how shared memory can be beneficial, there are so many doors. So just to go on the DAO example, one thing that was actually an original idea of Fileverse when we were thinking, okay, what could be the first app, was the recovery of public archives, important public information on the internet. 33% of all links have rotten in the past 5 years. Their entire academic journals, it's close to my heart. I'm an academic still, unfortunately, don't hold it against me. And there are whole journals that disappear off the face of the internet. And I'm not just talking about, some niche social science topics that like olfactory ethics. I don't know if you saw what happened on Twitter, that, some people might say, there is not enough money that supported the journal, so it disappeared. No, it's things that, you would consider essential for the advance of healthcare for people and that are not available anymore. So it would be great if there was a system to recover information like that when there is a clear signal by the owner, hey, I cannot continue keeping this up available for people on the internet. And you launch a signal, people see it, they either provide funds to continue the hosting, or they take it over and there is a porting of data that happens publicly. And this was one of the first things that became clear as a completely new use case for us. Loved it, so went deep into that. And then there are other things, just on the shared resources, again, Nick, one that, I shouldn't reveal too many things about what's coming up on Fileverse, but there are a lot of things. Shit.
A little alpha is nice.
Yeah. There are a lot of things wrong with the OP side, and you can do a lot of, going back to that verifiability that Spencer was also talking about you can cover many more use cases, especially for enterprises actually, and big companies. If you, for example, integrate a multi-sig in your ability to sign messages and who is able to sign messages depending on what role they have, etc. So I'll leave it at that. Spencer, Nick know already a lot about it. We discussed it a few times, but we're going to keep it at that.
I love the little teaser there. I'm going to be in all of your DMs after this being like, tell me more, tell me more. No, I personally love the shared memory and shared resource bit. I mean, it kind of is in line with the whole ethos of just building open source and decentralization that we're all here for. And I think like with the shared memory thing, I think is a big issue that I noticed even early on in my time in crypto. Is it felt like a lot of the things that we were trying to build, or a lot of the problems we were trying to solve for, have already been solved for in the past, just in a different sort of scenario. But because we weren't necessarily studying the past, whether it was that we didn't want to, or like you said, things just get deleted. Like what was 30% you said of links like just end up getting deleted? That's a big chunk of history and information and intelligence that we've collected over time. And to think how much farther along, even in society as a whole, we could be if we were able to hold on to those resources and memories and learnings that we've gathered over time. Like that is, it's mind-blowing. And I think it has huge implications on society way past just DAOs or crypto or, what we're working on directly, but like really on society and civilization as a whole. It kind of reminds me of that conversation we had with Trake back in episode 1, where we just got kind of meta, and philosophical. But like, I think that stuff is interesting because it's like the things we're building in crypto are interesting to us and maybe not to everybody else. But thinking about like what the future of society and civilization is going to be, like that's something that I think has, relevance and interest to everybody as a whole.
Yeah, there is this, I think something that you were pointing at is there isn't even the ability to make an informed, we don't need that information for the future, for humanity, for whatever. And this is something that irritates me even more about the centralized cloud paradigm that we've all sleepwalked into. It limits the imagination that we have about our own experiences online. Sociologists like to talk about affordances and that space between the imagination of the end user and the intention of the developer and the reality of the software interacting with the hardware. So there is a space there that is very limited because we think according to the limitations given by cloud paradigm. But if it was something with a shared memory, you would start immediately, I think, thinking about, okay, how do we do a knowledge transfer, at least to the family of that person that passed away, but that was working on their lifetime work and it's not accessible anymore. Like things like that I think in 20 years will feel ridiculous, or like you will remember these days as the not even teenage days of the internet, where we weren't even trying to enforce people's rights on there, and it was just pure chaos determined by corporate greed.
I love that point. Sorry, go ahead. Do you want to say something else?
No.
There's two kind of corroborating examples, I think, or one that supports and one in contrast is like, you think about the evolution of Chinese into simplified Chinese, like this idea of actually restricting the thought space that someone has as they're using is a more simplified language changes their actual thought patterns. And then in the opposite direction, I think what we're seeing with like the LLMs becoming so potent is that the people's possibility space, like the what they think a computer might be able to do based on where LLMs are and how fast they're progressing, is blown wide open. So people are like, oh, well, couldn't you just train an LLM to do that? Like people are saying that about everything. And that obviously, we don't know how far that's going to go, but there's something magical about this moment in time where I forget the exact word that you used, but the space between the developer's intention and the user's idea of what's possible is like much, much broader at the moment. I feel like it's a good time to be shipping new software, and like users are more open-minded about what they could be doing or what they might want to accomplish with software.
Yeah, completely agree.
Another angle on this like centralized cloud, centralized internet thing, especially, I mean, we think that within Hat's world about organizations, right, and enterprises and small teams and groups and communities and stuff. And there's this, I think, really challenging tension that a lot of organizations face, whether it's implicit or explicit, which is like, do I break free of the kind of the constraints or like the guardrails of something like Google Workspace and not have to deal with the negatives of that? Or do I like just accept it and then get all of the benefits of being inside of that ecosystem and all of the connections to other stuff and frankly amazing tools that only work well because they are tightly or can be tightly integrated because they work because Google built them or Google has allowed somebody to plug into them. And what that has like told me before is that there's really a lot of value, like huge network effects in the ability to interoperate between different things. And you can almost look at Google Workspace, Google Calendar kind of as like this anchor for this really amazing like ecosystem of applications that people can use and just like they all work together. The problem is that they work together only within the constraints of what Google allows them to do. As that limits, to your point about imagination, it limits people's imagination about what is possible to build. So I think one of the things that I find really exciting and promising about Fileverse is that you're starting to chip away at those network effects and sort of demonstrating that you can build amazing things without having to like cow to the rules of Google. And I think what blockchains offer is a different way to get those same network effects without having any single or small set of companies controlling it. So I'm very excited to like see lots of other projects follow Fileverse's footsteps in like chipping, like taking a part of what Google has built or like of what that ecosystem is and like moving it into the more open platform space. And to me, that's incredibly exciting because we have no idea in a very positive way what people will be able to build once they have that kind of open access to putting things together.
Yeah. And imagine how important access permissions will be in a world where everything can interoperate and fit into each other without asking necessarily for the developer's API key or whatever. So a few things on what you just said. One is I like to remind people that those monopolies that I so easily insult in my tirades when I talk about why Fileverse is important, they started by being maximally interoperable. Facebook was a huge success in its early days thanks to its developer community, because it made building on top of Fileverse, Facebook marketplace, and not marketplace, Facebook developer platform much easier. People were spinning out new mini games every day of the week. And then when they reached that critical mass of developers, they decided to just headshot thousands of founders, restricted the amount of connections they could do with other apps, with external servers, how they could monetize their own apps, etc. So we're just replaying a game that they played on others, but we're doing it for the long term and to remain open, rather than, capture enough people and then, gotcha, let me slap a big wall around the community so that nobody can get out anymore. So important thing to remind people that even those closed gardens saw the importance of being maximally interoperable. And now, just on the maximally interoperable things, the side of the discussion, I found it super exciting to see in the past year, I would say, especially 2024, a lot of non-financial apps, a lot of protocols like Hash protocol, like Safe protocol, like Rhinestone and others, create such an important glue for non-financial apps to actually grow in a way that is not zero sum. So it's not, those are my users and those users over there are Farcasters. No, every single daily active user of Farcaster could be a Fileverse daily active user as well, by remaining on Farcaster or their favorite UI or client, because there is part of our smart contract that offers that functionality that the client doesn't offer and that the end user might want. So you see that that huge benefit to not being a closed ecosystem that starts sparking people's interest. I think we're very early days. We experienced it with DeFi. It was clear to everyone how powerful a DeFi stack was. It's not yet clear to enough people why the most social stack is important as well.
I think this is a really interesting, really interesting topic. And one of the really interesting parts of that is how in this like utopia of interoperability and composability, where everybody can kind of like use everything at the same time, that utopia or that like a beautiful world will only exist if developers feel like they have the ability to devote sort of the necessary resources to building those kinds of things. And I think they'll only be able to do that if they feel like they'll be able to get a reasonable like return on that investment, or those things will be sustainable and not be just forked into like the value of them will not just be forked into oblivion. And I think what we saw in DeFi, or we see in DeFi, is that there are still, even though there's composability and interoperability across DeFi protocols, there's still like a strong gravity within a single protocol because of the power or the network effects of liquidity.
Yeah.
And so I think a really important question that all of us in the non-financial blockchain application space need to be thinking hard about is, what is our version of that makes our applications sustainable even while we are interoperability and composability maximalists? And this is obviously something we think a lot about within HATS, but I'm very curious to what degree within Fileverse you guys have thought about this and how you're sort of conceptualizing that and how you're seeing your own future in those terms.
So I really like the question because it points at the most important tension in the difference between the DeFi stack mixing and the non-DeFi stack mixing. And before I answer your question, I wanted to throw it at you actually, but do you think that there are similar dynamics of network effects that follow the 80-20 rule in the social space as well, if it is open. So yes, Uniswap still captures most of liquidity. Yes, Aave still captures most of the liquidity there. Do you think you'll see, those major social hubs that, despite being open and allowing external apps and clients to use the same exact social data, that there'll be those mega apps?
Well, I guess, so I don't really know. As part of, I think that's one of the open questions I think that exists. I think an important distinction is between apps and protocols, or apps and protocol-ish stuff. I think it would be it may be easier for protocols to do that because they can kind of, like, by definition, cut across lots of different applications. And so have like a protocol, a given protocol has maybe more opportunity or chance to become sustainable even while it's like mixed in with lots of other applications and protocols, because the potential footprint is wider. On the other hand, an application may have the ability to have like a closer relationship with its users, and therefore like that relationship can be stickier than the relationship of a user with a protocol. With DeFi, and I'm sort of like maybe making a false distinction between apps and protocols, or maybe pointing at one angle on that. But with DeFi, they're like both protocols and apps, and sometimes apps are able to take fees on top of the protocol that they are interacting with, and that can be mutually beneficial. And that can work really nicely because the resources that those applications and protocols need to sustain their own continued development is one and the same with the product that they're like offering, which is money basically. And that's not the same thing, or that's not the case for non-financial, like literally it's in the name, non-financial applications. So a really big open question is like, how do we all share in the sort of return of value back to the things that we're building in this like different kind of world? And I'm still figuring it out. I mean, I'm not going to figure it out, but I'm still thinking about it a lot. And it's still a really big open question that I'm excited to explore more and learn more about.
Yeah. For me, so now to finally answer your question as well, but for me, I know it will sound almost naive, but utility in UX is that return you could equate to the financial return that a lot of people were getting from DeFi apps. I know it's a stretch. I know that probably most participants in crypto would disagree. They would say, no, it's really, I just want some money, man, which is understandable. Like, good for you if you're trying to find ways to make your family's life more bearable, for example, by chasing stuff on DeFi, then no shame on that. But I think that there's some basic functionalities that people want to have on the internet whenever they open their computer and log on to the internet that are impossible to bypass. So from the moment that you have some types of activities that are required in the daily life of the average Joe, this is already the full story of incentives that you're looking for as a non-financial app or protocol, in saying, okay, I'm going to offer services that fulfill the absolute needs of the end user. And the return is the utility and the improved experience, either in terms of feature or in terms of aesthetic or in terms of customization, whatever. And this might be the sufficient incentive that we can think of as, okay, it's the main return that people might be looking for in the non-financial side of crypto. It's a bit convoluted what I'm saying. It's not very clear. I'm on the same page as you, Spencer. So we know that, okay, we're meeting a need. We're offering UX benefits that other apps are not. So compatible with Markdown, import, export that Google doesn't really have. It works offline, so when you're on the plane and you want to continue writing, you can do it, and Google doesn't do it. So there are a bunch of things about our tech stack in crypto in general, ddocs more specifically, that makes a room for better UX for stuff like offline working, super simple, or like I want to send collaborate with people on the same plane, whatever. That is possible because we don't have the centralized architectures that rule the rest of the world. So if you've thought about your app mainly through the local first approach, through keeping as much on device as possible, then already you're offering UX advantages that others might not have. Yeah. So new features, utility, UX. What else? What's the secret incentive sauce for the non-financial apps? Please, nobody tell me token.
I think it's going to be that the ability to collaborate in this new way is going to be extraordinarily valuable. So I think what we're building is core infrastructure for a net new way of creating value as a community or as a group or as a network or as a DAO. And that is going to outrun and outpace the traditional hierarchical models. And those new organizations and the value that they create will be much greater. So it might be that, Hats and Fileverse don't actually accrue that much value to those pieces of the stack, but all of us can go and create a new DAO that is one of the biggest organizations in the world and have shared ownership in that, and that is the way that we actually win. So being early to being a developer in this ecosystem is half the battle, is being early to the other projects that are using the infrastructure that we're creating and having shared ownership in it.
Yeah.
So we should just keep doing what we're doing, and the Lambos will just flow to us.
Rain down from the sky.
Yeah.
That's
my understanding of what you said, Nick.
First are good.
I was going to ask something earlier when we were, talking about kind of reinventing this like Google Workspace thing. Is the reason that people like Google Workspace in the traditional world is that it makes work super convenient. You have all of your apps there in one place. And I think when we think outside of the crypto community to just the broader Web2 community or the broader non-crypto tech community, people really optimize for convenience over everything, like over privacy, over anything really. Like convenience is key. And so I'm wondering what this new iteration of Google Workspace is going to look like in the Web3 world with all of these decentralized apps. Like how will Fileverse, fit in with Hats protocol? Like if I'm an organization, I'm using Fileverse, I'm using Hats, I'm using all of these different tools in order to manage my on-chain team. What will that look like to me as a user? Like, what will that new version of Google Workspace, just something that looks really clean, something that has all my tools in one central location, that's really easy to use. Like, what will that look like? And what are the limitations of that? As I think the only non-technical person in the room, like, what are the technical limitations of getting us to that place?
So there are two parts of your question. I'll start with the one that gave me a more provocative thought, which is I would disagree with the premise that in the Web2 world, they optimize for convenience. I think they optimize for, you're kind of right, actually, but they also optimize, I would say, for just their business model. And their business model for most of them is data surveillance driven. It's a business model of 80% of all internet companies, something like that, the main source of revenue. So suddenly you see a lot of things that are not super convenient that start fucking up with your experience on an app that you used to think of as this super simple, super optimized, simple app. So for example, when you log on to Twitter and you want to share a link, that link will first go through the T domain, which adds 1.2 millisecond extra time for loading a page because they want to fingerprint the shit out of who you are, who you interacted with, and all your metadata. Same for most websites. There is a bunch of reloading that happens in order to make sure that the right cookie is tracking the right movement of your nose while you're interacting with the website, etc. So they're starting to deny something that was very successful for them, which is provide a lot of convenience to people. But that's exactly why I'm pointing it out, because I think that the crypto space has quite the potential to not fall as easily for predatory business models that will inevitably push them to act against the interests of their users and the simplicity of their apps. So one clear example is ddocs today. You go on it, you don't need an account. You can simply start and you can start collaborating with someone else, and they don't need an account. They can just do it. Google forces you to create an account, and if you're gonna share with someone to edit with you, and it's not just a very specific access permission, then they also need an account just to view your stuff. So there is that. And now to the maybe more interesting part, which is the most important things that we've been doing internally at Fileverse in our new smart contracts was, okay, how can we, so we figured out now how to have the safe protocol and HATS protocol work as native extensions of the Fileverse smart contract, meaning we have specifically, wait, I'm trying to find the name. We have something in the new contract, which just got updated by Nethermind. So we're very happy. We're gonna share some details there, but we have a file manager contract that leverages HATS protocol in order to look at, okay, what exactly does this person's role look like within this organization's Fileverse smart contract. And it allows us to really, there is a saying for that, it's a separation of concerns almost and efforts, but we can rely on the robustness of safe accounts, multi-sigs, and the robustness of the HAS protocol and the utility it brings that we do not have to bake into our contracts. We can just leverage our open standards and know that just by using this open standard, we know that our app and our contracts will be easily integratable and interoperable with other applications because they're using exactly the same part of the stack. So it becomes not only a no-brainer, but almost shooting yourself in the foot not to take the direction of, okay, which protocol is actually seriously looking at solving core issues, which we like to call middleware issues at Fileverse, like HATS protocol, that can just, take us to the next stage and not force onto app developers a lot of infra thinking and developing. And because, I admire Spencer and Nick for the grinding that needs to go into providing a new primitive, actually, to the crypto space. But yeah, it's not evident at all.
Amazing. Dana, that's your answer, which is that all of these things can work together at the protocol level, at the smart contract level, and then anybody, including our respective teams or even somebody else, can permissionlessly build an application that aggregates a bunch of user-facing tools or applications together that is maybe as good as or maybe even better than what Google has built in that respect. And then if you as a user or organization wants to use one of those, great, but you're not locked into that. And some other team could build a competing aggregating application that maybe looks exactly the same, but with, better privacy preserve, better, maybe slightly better UI or slightly better terms of service, or maybe looks very different in a much better way or better for a particular niche. But under the hood, it's all using the same application. So maybe even within a single organization, you have different people using different sort of aggregators, but it doesn't matter because it all just works together. And I think that is extremely beautiful and very exciting.
It's beautiful, and also it's compatible with the direction that a lot of regulations are taking worldwide. The GDPR is starting finally to enforce onto companies things like the right to exit, the right to be forgotten. And those are things that are by default designed into the tech that we're talking about today. Not retroactively try to force it into the cloud model of Google that nowadays pays $3 billion fines for having an architecture that is predatory and doesn't allow for what we discussed. Just one quick last point on that. Sorry, tendency for verbosity. The one of the biggest delays, let's say, to Fileverse putting out there a good version of integrated HATS protocol in the Fileverse smart contracts has been the UX. Our role here is to make the UX 10 times better than anything that the Web2 people and devs can do out there. So because we have the reassurance that the protocol is good, it's robust, it's thought of like those edge cases of dynamics where you have to revoke access, but maybe just temporarily or whatever, it gives us that assurance, but also the time to focus on, okay, what's the killer UX for assigning access permissions, removing them, adding some parameters to them. So we really want to make it fit and feel natural to ddocs and Fileverse. So this has been taking a lot of our time on this specifically. But we did test out something very basic during DEF CON with the DEF CON portal where we were testing out our new contracts. Yeah.
Well, I look forward to a world where we have all of these tools up and working. I think that, like, to your last point, Spencer, that optionality and that choice is really going to be the big game changer as we move from like a Google workspace to all of these things that we have in the Web3 world that people can use to manage their communities and permissions and work on chain. So that is what I'm really excited about. Do any of you have any final thoughts before we wrap up this conversation?
One quick final thought. Since before the call, we were quickly talking about Echo, which is one way of doing angel rounds, but in a way that is on-chain to some degree. I want to say that having spoken in the past few years to a bunch of investors, outside researchers, outside people that are kind of interested in DAOs, but more generally in crypto, a lot might ask, I don't know if it's a valuable thought, but to DAO listeners or people that like DAOs, it might be, a lot of them ask, why would you focus on something as niche as DAOs? It will be limited. I don't see the space for the growth. And, you know, Nick and Spencer know that better than anyone. If you're in front of an investor and they throw something like that at you, you don't want to necessarily convince them that, oh, it's going to be huge in the future. There are other approaches to explaining to people, and not just investors, your family during Christmas holidays, why it is so important. And for me, it boils down to the freedom of experimentation in a way that is open, unrestricted, and where you know that the participants will have that little degree of folly in their brain where they want to test new stuff. They'll try difficult stuff on new stuff. They'll try to look for edge cases. They'll give you immediate feedback on Twitter and call you names. Okay, they call you names, not necessarily, but there is that energy, there is that openness, there is something that we haven't seen since the golden days of the 19th OSS movements. And it's the most exciting thing about our space. It's not the amount of money flowing in. It's not the prediction market. It's really that openness, energy, full collaboration, and yeah.
Totally agree. Yeah, we need all of that in order to drive innovation forward. Like, innovation can't happen without all of that. So I'm super bullish on, you know, obviously the ethos of the space and everything that we're working on building towards. Great. Well, it's been awesome speaking with you, Andreas. Before we go, tell us where people can find you on the internet, since you've made it very clear you're terminally online and also terminally on chain. It sounds like. So tell people where they can find you on the internet and also where people can go to check out Fileverse.
Okay, so best way is you go in your URL bar right now, you write ddocs.new and you get access and you don't need an account. You can start doing interesting things there. You can find out more about Fileverse and ddocs at Fileverse on Twitter and a bit more about me at Miro Yato on Twitter, Farcaster, and I will keep my Reddit account private for now.
Probably a good idea. And then Spencer and Nick, I know we do this every episode, but remind people again where they can find both of you on the interwebs as well.
We can be found at Hats Protocol on Twitter and on Farcaster, hatsprotocol.xyz on the internet, and on Twitter 0xnn2 and nintynick.eth on Farcaster.
Perfect.
And I am Spengrah, SPNGRAH, pretty much everywhere. I think it's got a .eth at the end on Farcaster, but I think you could find me anyways.
Awesome. And I will include all of those links in the show notes so it's easy for people to click through. Thank you all for tuning into another episode of Roll Call. We've got 2 more episodes for you before the end of the year. Love the fireworks going off behind Andreas's head right now. Little party tricks on the remote recordings. But yeah, we'll be back again soon with another episode. So stay tuned and we'll talk to you soon.